The station was noisy, alive with the endless chatter of hundreds of species moving in and out of the Galactic transit hub. Ships of all shapes docked along the platforms, from sleek silver freighters to towering bulk carriers with glowing blue engines. Aliens of every form walked among humans, some floating above the ground, some with multiple limbs, some covered in thick scales. Most moved with purpose, ignoring the suffering around them. Hunger, pain, and fear were not uncommon here, but they were usually someone else's problem. She appeared suddenly in the midst of the crowd, and yet she seemed impossible to miss. She was small, thin, and fragile-looking, her skin a pale green that clung tightly to her bones. Her eyes were enormous, dark, and wet, shining with a desperate fear that made even the busiest passerby slow their steps. Around her, three small creatures clung to her legs. Their bodies were frail, their eyes dull with exhaustion. Their stomachs were hollow, their lips cracked and dry. They were her children, and they had not eaten for days. The mother raised her arms in pleading. She shouted, voice trembling, yet loud enough to reach the ears of everyone near her. "My children haven't eaten for days. If you feed them, I'll be yours forever." The words were desperate, raw, and filled with a fear that made the crowd avert their eyes. Several species stepped aside to avoid her, muttering curses under their breaths. The Galactic Union's laws forbade aid to starving species in crowded hubs unless authorized by trade guilds. Most species followed this law strictly, seeing hunger as a weakness to be ignored, or worse, exploited. Merchants in nearby stalls whispered about how feeding her could ruin their contracts or provoke fines. Some species laughed quietly, saying she should have thought of this before bringing children into a galaxy ruled by trade and survival of the fittest. Yet among the crowd, one human stopped. His uniform marked him as a relief officer, but not a high-ranking one. He was tall, with sharp eyes and a quiet presence. Ethan Hale had seen desperation before, but he had never seen it so pure, so honest, so undeniable. He crouched slightly to meet the alien mother's gaze. He did not speak immediately. He just watched, letting the weight of her plea sink in. The mother's voice shook with panic as she repeated her offer. "Please, I have nothing left to give, I beg you. Just a small meal for them, and I will serve you forever." She did not raise her hands in submission, did not bow as her culture would have demanded. She was not offering loyalty because it was expected. She was offering herself because she had nothing else left. Ethan hesitated. The laws of the Galactic Union were clear, but so were the laws of humanity, or at least the instincts that guided it. Humans had a habit of noticing suffering and acting, even when it broke rules, even when it was dangerous. He reached into his ration pack and pulled out a small, dense packet of emergency food. It was enough for one alien child, maybe two if he rationed carefully. The mother's eyes widened, disbelief spreading across her face. You will feed them." Without taking anything?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, trembling like the leaves of a dying tree. Ethan nodded. "Just eat, that's all, no contracts, no promises, just food." Slowly, she lowered her children to the ground, each too weak to move without support. The three small beings crawled forward, eyes wide, staring at the strange packet in the human's hands. Ethan tore the packet open and broke it into small pieces. The children sniffed, hesitated, then began to eat. Their small hands shook as they held the food, and their eyes began to brighten with the first sign of life they had felt in days. The mother knelt beside them, her body trembling, a mix of relief and fear written across every line of her face. Other travelers watched. Some whispered to each other, questioning the human. Why would he risk punishment, loss of rank, or even his life for this alien? Some frowned, thinking of the economic consequences. Others felt a strange stirring in their hearts, something unfamiliar. Compassion, admiration, perhaps fear as well. Humanity had a reputation, but few had seen it in action. The mother finally spoke, quieter this time, her voice almost breaking. I do not know your name, human. How can you do this? Why do you help us when no one else will? Maybe strange is what the galaxy needs." From the shadows of nearby platforms, a few traders and guild representatives observed the scene. Whispers ran through the crowd. Feeding starving aliens without permission was a serious offense. A human had just broken one of the Union's unspoken rules, profit over life. Some of them scowled, muttering about fines and sanctions. Others, secretly, felt admiration. The mother turned to Ethan, tears streaming down her face. I offer myself. I will serve you forever if you continue to feed them." The idea that someone would help without demanding something in return was almost incomprehensible. She looked at her children, their bellies full for the first time in days, and finally understood that she had stumbled into something rare. something alien to every law and custom she had ever known. Ethan watched her carefully. He knew the act of feeding them was only the beginning. Hunger was rarely caused by chance. It was a symptom of corruption, greed, and deliberate control. He looked at the mother not as someone in need, but as a guide to understanding a system that had gone terribly wrong. The mother finally spoke, her voice trembling but filled with a newfound hope. I do not know how to thank you. My people, they are starving because of rules we cannot break, laws we cannot fight. How can you just ignore them? Hunger doesn't wait for laws and suffering doesn't care about contracts. Sometimes you just feed the hungry. They were alive again, their energy returning like a slow-burning fire. Nearby, some humans in uniform began to notice. Rumors would spread later. A human had fed starving aliens in the busiest hub of the galaxy without permission. Some would call him reckless, some would call him a hero. For Ethan, it was simple. He could not watch suffering when he had the ability to act. As the last of the food was shared, the mother knelt beside him, looking at him with a mix of gratitude and awe. I thought all humans were like the traders and merchants here, only thinking of profit and gain. But you are different. My children, they live because of you. I will do anything for you. You live and that is enough. Your children will grow strong. That's what matters, that's the point. They were alive because someone had chosen to act, not because of law, threat, or profit. The crowd began to disperse, the moment ending as quickly as it had started. Travelers returned to their paths, ships prepared to leave, and the station returned to its usual hum of activity. But for those few minutes, the air had been different. Hope had entered a place that often forgot such things. Compassion had appeared where it was least expected. Humanity had quietly, without fanfare, reminded the galaxy that some beings acted not for gain, but because it was the right thing to do. The mother stood slowly, gathering her children. They were weak, but they could walk. She looked at Ethan, trying to form words that could express the impossible combination of gratitude, awe, and disbelief. She finally whispered, You are unlike anyone I have ever met. Maybe humans are the species that can change the galaxy. And though she did not yet understand the full consequences, she knew one thing. Someone had fed the hungry today, and that simple act might be the first spark of something much greater. And as the mother and her children disappeared into the crowd, the rumor began to spread. A human had fed the unfed. A human had ignored the laws of profit and scarcity. A human had reminded the galaxy of a concept that had long been forgotten, that sometimes kindness is more powerful than any weapon. The moment passed, but the ripples of what had happened began to spread. News traveled faster than any ship through the crowded platforms of the interstellar transit hub. Whispers and rumors about the human who had fed starving aliens without asking for payment moved like fire through the crowd. Merchants paused mid-sail, traders looked over their ledgers nervously, and even some Galactic Union officials began to murmur behind closed doors. The mother and her children had disappeared into the throng, but the memory of the human's actions lingered, spreading hope and confusion in equal measure. Ethan Hale stayed where he was, watching the crowd disperse. He knew the situation would not end here. In his experience, the acts that mattered most were often the ones that drew attention from the wrong people. The trade guilds controlled supply, profit, and even survival in most sectors. They thrived on scarcity, manipulating hunger and resources to maintain power. Feeding a starving alien family, even with the best intentions, was the kind of action that could attract hostility. And it did not take long for the signs to appear. A group of guild enforcers emerged from the shadows near the docking bay. Their armor gleamed darkly under the lights, symbols of authority etched into their chest plates. They moved in a coordinated, deliberate manner, scanning the crowd until their gaze landed on Ethan. Recognition flickered in their eyes. He had become a problem. One of their officers, tall and rigid with a voice that carried the weight of law, stepped forward. "You are Ethan Hale, correct?" the officer asked, voice cold and formal. "Human Relief Officer, you have just fed aliens in violation of Union trade regulations. This is a serious offense." Nothing more. But he did not flinch. The moral line had already been crossed, and he would not step back now. The mother and her children watched from a distance, hidden behind a stack of cargo containers. She had expected someone to intervene, but she had not imagined that the human would allow himself to be taken in their place. Her heart twisted with worry and gratitude. She wanted to run to him, to shield him from what she knew would follow, but she also knew that interfering could make matters worse. She stayed still, her small hands clutching her children, praying silently that humans with their strange ways would prevail. The guild officers led Ethan through the station, past gates and checkpoints, past eyes that stared in curiosity and fear. No one stopped them. Authority rarely did, especially when it had the weight of law behind it. They reached a detention area reserved for such offenses, a stark metallic room with reinforced walls, minimal furnishings, and no view of the outside. The officers left him there, their steps echoing in the empty space, leaving a sense of foreboding in the air. Ethan had been alone in such places before, but this time he felt something different. The hunger he had just addressed was only the surface of the problem. He knew that feeding those children was only the first act in a much larger story. Scarcity was rarely accidental. Someone somewhere had orchestrated this suffering to gain profit, control, or power, and he intended to find out who. He activated his personal scanner, a small device humans carried that could detect food sources, chemical compounds, and supply chains. It was designed to identify contamination or shortages, but in this case, he hoped it would point him toward the cause of deliberate starvation. His scanner traced the food lines back through the station, through storage bays and docking manifests, to a cluster of trade nodes controlled by one of the largest guilds in the sector. Ethan leaned back against the cold wall, thinking. The guilds were powerful, far more powerful than any individual human, but humans had a habit of solving problems in ways that others did not expect. They did not always fight with weapons or armies. They used ingenuity, resourcefulness, and a willingness to act where others hesitated. If he could expose the system that caused this hunger, he could help more than just a single mother and her children. Hours passed, and the mother remained nearby, moving silently through the shadows. She observed him, wondering how humans thought, how they acted. Her people were used to fear, manipulation, and repayment for every act of kindness. Humans seemed different. Ethan was different. While she waited, she thought of the children who now slept peacefully in a small, hidden corner. Their bellies were full, their spirits lifted, but danger lingered. Feeding them had drawn attention, and she feared the consequences. Back in the detention area, Ethan reviewed data he had downloaded from the station's networks. The supply collapse that had caused the children's hunger was no accident. It was deliberate. A few influential traders had manipulated shipping routes, redirected shipments, and inflated prices to the point where essential food could not reach certain species. They had created scarcity, knowing it would make those species desperate and easier to control. Ethan's mind worked quickly. He understood that stopping this required more than feeding children. It required exposing the system and creating alternatives. If he could deploy technology to produce food independently of the guilds, he could bypass scarcity entirely. It was a bold plan, risky and certain to provoke retaliation, but it was the only way to save countless lives. Meanwhile, the mother whispered to her children. "We are safe for now," she said softly, "but we must be careful. The humans, they are not like anyone we have met. We will trust them, but we must stay hidden." The children nodded, their young minds not fully understanding the danger but trusting in their mother's words. Outside, the station's normal rhythm continued, unaware of the small human who was about to challenge an entire system. Travelers moved past, merchants conducted business, and ships continued to arrive and depart. Yet the actions of one human, feeding starving children, had already set events in motion that would shake the foundations of power. The guilds, meanwhile, were not idle. Reports of Ethan's actions reached their central command, and panic spread among the leadership. Hunger was a tool, and humans had interfered. The idea that a single human could defy their control without concern for profit was unimaginable. Discussions were held in hushed tones, strategies were drawn, and emissaries were dispatched. The guilds had never faced a species that acted without expectation of return, and their arrogance blinded them to the possibility that humans could outmaneuver them without violence. Ethan was released the following morning, escorted by officers who were cautious but respectful. No one knew what he would do next, and none of the guilds were willing to risk provoking him publicly. He walked back to the hidden area where the mother and children waited. Their reunion was quiet but filled with relief. "We have to move quickly," Ethan said. "The guilds will try to stop any further aid, but I can help you get more food and I can make it last. We do not need to wait for shipments or permits. I can show you how to produce your own." Ethan led them to a secluded part of the station, where old storage bays had been abandoned by the guilds. There, he began setting up compact human food printers, machines that could produce nutrient-rich food from basic chemical compounds. The mother watched in awe as he explained how the devices worked, how they could feed her children and eventually her entire community. "These printers will allow you to survive without relying on shipments," he said. "They require energy and raw materials, but they will produce food consistently. You can distribute it safely to anyone who needs it. The guilds may try to block access, but these machines will give you independence." Ethan handed them small printed meals, showing them how to use the devices. Their laughter returned, soft and tentative at first, then growing louder as they realized that hunger no longer controlled their lives. The mother's gratitude was overwhelming. I do not know how to repay you. We owe you everything, not just for today, but for the future. You have given us life when we thought it was gone." Stories circulated of humans who acted without selfishness, who valued life over profit, who refused to look away. The guilds tried to contain the narrative, but the truth was unstoppable. Compassion had been demonstrated, and the galaxy took notice. By evening, more families approached Ethan, quietly seeking help. He worked tirelessly, setting up printers, explaining how to use them, and teaching small communities to produce their own food. It was exhausting, but he did not stop. The principle was simple: no one should starve when help is possible. The mother watched, her heart filled with a mixture of relief and awe. She realized that humans were unlike any species she had encountered. They did not conquer through fear, manipulation, or dominance. They conquered through action, through ingenuity, and through the refusal to ignore suffering. She knew that the galaxy had changed, at least in this small corner, because of one human who had simply chosen to feed those who could not feed themselves. And somewhere, deep in the corridors of guild headquarters, the leaders were panicked. Their control was slipping. Humans did not follow the same rules as the rest of the galaxy. They were unpredictable, resourceful, and unwilling to let others suffer. The guilds could no longer rely on scarcity as a weapon, not when humans were willing to act against it. Ethan looked out over the crowd from his hidden vantage point, watching the children play, the mother organize her community, and other species begin to approach cautiously for guidance. The future was uncertain, and conflict with the guilds was inevitable. But for now, hope had returned to those who had almost given up, and that was enough. Humanity had made its mark, quietly and without fanfare, and the galaxy had begun to notice that there was a species unwilling to look away from suffering. The news of humans feeding starving aliens had spread beyond the station. Rumors traveled faster than ships in the hyperlanes, reaching sectors controlled by the most powerful trade guilds. Whispers turned into warnings, warnings became threats, and threats eventually became orders. Guild fleets, armed with authority and intimidation rather than weapons, began moving toward the sectors where humans had intervened. They intended to reassert control, enforce scarcity, and remind everyone that the rules of the galaxy had not changed. Ethan Hale watched the reports from a secure station console. The guilds had sent messages demanding that the humans stop all assistance immediately. They called it interference, violation, and even rebellion. But Ethan knew their words were meaningless if their threats could be bypassed. Feeding children had been simple. Now it was time to outsmart those who thrived on fear. The mother and her children remained close by, helping distribute the food produced by the humans' printers. Her people were recovering, energy returning to their limbs, eyes brightening with hope. They moved carefully, avoiding the patrolling guild drones, but their spirits were high. It was a rare moment of safety, a bubble of calm in a galaxy that had long forgotten compassion. Ethan called a small team of human engineers and diplomats to the station. They worked quietly, setting up more printers, improving energy efficiency, and creating networks for distributing food to other starving populations. The principle was simple: bypass scarcity entirely. If the guilds could not stop the production, their control over hunger would be meaningless. The mother watched as humans worked tirelessly. She had offered herself in gratitude before, expecting repayment in service or loyalty, but she realized that humans operated differently. They did not act for control, profit, or allegiance. They acted because it was the right thing to do. It was almost impossible to comprehend, yet she felt it deeply in her bones. Her children played nearby, laughing softly as they used the printers, unaware of the magnitude of what was happening. Back in guild command centers, panic spread. Advisors argued loudly, some calling for immediate military action, others urging caution. "If we strike," one official warned, "we risk proving that humans cannot be controlled. Their actions inspire others." Starvation as a tool is losing its power. Now entire sectors were watching to see what would happen next. Ethan prepared for the guild's inevitable moves. He could not stop them entirely, but he could stay one step ahead. Using the station's network, he began tracking shipments, predicting where the guilds would intervene, and rerouting supplies to areas most at risk. He was not just feeding individuals, he was creating a system that could survive attempts at suppression. The mother approached him cautiously. "They will come for you," she said quietly, fear evident in her voice. "We are safe only because they have not yet realized the scale of what you are doing. When they do, and if we act carefully, they cannot stop us entirely. They control scarcity, but they do not control determination." Within hours, the first guild emissaries arrived at the station. They were not soldiers, they were auditors, inspectors, and administrators, all claiming authority from the Union. Their goal was not to fight, but to investigate, report, and intimidate. They demanded that the printers be shut down and that food production cease immediately. Ethan met them calmly. "This station is neutral," he said firmly. "These machines produce food for those in need. No laws are broken, no one is harmed. The people you see here are alive because they have been fed, not because of your regulations. You may take note of that." Ethan was not loud, not aggressive, but his certainty carried weight. Other species watched from the shadows, curious and hesitant. Some whispered among themselves, wondering if humans truly could act without fear of reprisal. The mother stayed behind Ethan, her children safe and fed. She watched the humans operate with efficiency, calm, and focus. She could see the guilds faltering under the quiet power of action and morality. It was not a fight of weapons, but a fight of principle, and humans were winning. One of the emissaries attempted to assert authority. "These actions violate guild regulations. You are interfering with trade networks. Cease immediately, or the Union will respond. Cease doing nothing while others starve. That is the only violation here. We will continue to feed those who need it. The rest of your laws cannot stop life from surviving. Humans feed the hungry. Humans do not follow the rules." Rumors, small at first, began to swell into conversations, then into demands. Other aliens, once indifferent, began to step forward, quietly seeking help. Ethan understood that exposure was part of the strategy. The more species saw humans acting, the harder it would be for the guilds to suppress aid without backlash. Humans had a habit of inspiring others to act, not through command, but through example. Meanwhile, the mother quietly taught other aliens how to use the printers. She had learned quickly, absorbing every instruction Ethan gave. Her people now had the ability to survive independently. It was not just about feeding children anymore. It was about creating a network of self-sustaining communities, free from the control of corrupt guilds. The guild emissaries left that evening, reporting back that while humans had acted against regulations, no direct violation could be proven. They had witnessed compassion, efficiency, and survival. They feared what their leaders would say, but they could not deny the facts. By morning, the station was buzzing. Aliens who had never seen humans before observed the printers, learned how to operate them, and began feeding their own communities. Word spread quickly. Humans had given the technology for survival without expecting anything in return. The concept was revolutionary for many species. Some were cautious, but most were curious and willing to try. Ethan moved among them, providing guidance, solving technical problems, and ensuring that the food network remained stable. He did not boast, did not demand recognition, and did not hesitate. For him, the act of helping was its own reward. The mother stood nearby, quietly amazed. "Your species, you do not ask for loyalty. You do not demand repayment. You simply act. We have never seen this before, never." Communities began to thrive. Children laughed and played where once there had been despair. The mother's people regained strength, and with it, confidence. The guilds, watching from afar, realized that their influence was slipping. Scarcity, their most powerful weapon, was being rendered ineffective by human ingenuity. They debated among themselves, some urging more aggressive measures, others recognizing that direct confrontation could inspire further resistance. Humanity's actions had changed the rules, demonstrating that life and compassion could not be controlled in the same way as profit. Ethan knew this was only the beginning. The guilds would attempt to challenge him, to restore their control, to maintain scarcity. But he also knew humans had an advantage, their willingness to act when others would not. That willingness, combined with knowledge, technology, and the moral clarity to choose life over profit, made them unstoppable in a way the galaxy had not anticipated. Late one night, the mother approached him quietly. Her children were asleep nearby, safe in a small makeshift shelter. "You have changed everything here," she said softly. "Not just for my people, but for everyone who has suffered under the guilds. We cannot repay you. If more people act like this, hunger will lose its power. Help them understand that no one should suffer when help is possible. And remember, one act can spark many others. That is how change spreads." Ethan organized teams, delegating responsibilities while continuing to expand the food network. Guild patrols observed from the edges of space, but their attempts to intervene were thwarted by clever rerouting, technological independence, and the growing alliance of species empowered by humans. By the end of the week, the station had transformed. What had been a crowded, indifferent hub became a center of life, cooperation, and hope. Children laughed openly, adults worked together, and aliens once ignored by the galaxy now had a place of safety and sustenance. The mother, standing among her recovered people, could only marvel at the human who had done all this with no weapon, no threat, and no demand for repayment. The guilds realized that this human, Ethan Hale, was more dangerous than armies, more powerful than money, and more influential than fear. He did not fight for himself, he fought for others. He did not demand loyalty, he inspired it. And most importantly, he showed the galaxy that life could not be controlled by scarcity, manipulation, or threat when humans were willing to act. As night fell over the station, Ethan looked out at the stars. Ships moved silently across the dark canvas of space, unaware of the small revolution taking place in a single station. Yet the change was real, tangible, and unstoppable. The galaxy would remember this moment. Humanity had proven that compassion could not be ignored, and that determination combined with morality could challenge even the most entrenched powers. And somewhere, deep in the offices of the guilds, leaders were forced to reconsider everything they had believed. Humans had shown them a new rule of the galaxy. Those who refuse to look away from suffering cannot be controlled. The guilds were not idle. Their emissaries had returned to their sectors, bringing reports of humans spreading food production and teaching other species to survive independently. Panic rippled through their leadership councils. The guilds had relied on control over scarcity for centuries. It was their most reliable tool. Now, a single human had demonstrated that scarcity could be bypassed, and the consequences were unpredictable. Across multiple sectors, the guilds tried to assert authority. Their fleets patrolled supply routes, checking shipments and intimidating smaller species. They sent inspectors to stations, issuing fines and warnings. Everywhere they moved, humans had already anticipated them. By rerouting shipments, deploying mobile food units, and sharing knowledge openly, humans ensured that guild interference caused little more than minor delays. Ethan Hale worked tirelessly, coordinating between sectors. He was no longer a lone officer. He had become the central node in a growing network of survival. His team of engineers, diplomats, and volunteers worked around the clock, setting up printers, distributing food, and teaching local populations how to sustain themselves. Every day, more species joined the effort, inspired by humans who acted without fear or expectation of repayment. The mother, once desperate and weak, had become a leader among her people. She organized distribution points, trained volunteers, and ensured that children and vulnerable adults were fed first. Her confidence grew alongside her people's strength. She observed Ethan quietly, learning from his approach and marveling at his steadfast calm. Unlike any species she had known, humans did not rely on threats, manipulation, or fear. They acted with purpose, reason, and compassion, and their results spoke louder than any decree or law. The guilds, frustrated by their inability to suppress this growing movement, escalated their tactics. They sent official notices declaring the human-led stations illegal and threatening to confiscate food production equipment. They pressured local governments to intervene and demanded obedience. In some sectors, they even attempted to sabotage food printers, hoping to create panic and restore their control. Ethan anticipated each move. He had designed redundancies into the network, ensuring that even if a printer was destroyed, others nearby could compensate. Communities had begun to self-organize, with local leaders trained to maintain operations independently. Every attempt at interference only strengthened the network, as species united to protect what they had gained. The mother approached Ethan one morning, concern etched on her face. "They are increasing their efforts," she said. "I fear that they may try more than just threats. What will happen then?" We feed the hungry before they can be controlled. That changes everything. The balance of power was shifting. Guild operatives attempted to intimidate these newcomers. They issued warnings, citing regulations, and even tried to seize equipment. But the combined force of trained communities, human volunteers, and decentralized networks made interference impossible without risking open conflict. The guilds had underestimated the influence of humans acting morally and strategically. The Mother's people were thriving. Children laughed openly in spaces that had once been silent with hunger. Adults worked together, organizing supplies and creating new points for distribution. The Mother reflected on the human who had started it all. He did not demand obedience or loyalty, did not seek recognition or reward. He simply acted, and in doing so, he had shown that one species could change the rules of the galaxy without firing a shot. Ethan moved among the communities, observing operations and providing guidance where needed. He was careful to remain humble, avoiding the trappings of authority. His leadership was quiet but absolute. Those around him respected his knowledge, dedication, and integrity. The simple acts of providing food, instruction, and reassurance created a network far more resilient than any guild strategy. Reports from other sectors indicated that guild influence was weakening. Species that had previously accepted suffering as normal began to question the system. Some attempted small acts of rebellion, distributing food secretly to neighbors. Others approached humans directly for assistance and guidance. Every action undermined the guild's authority and demonstrated that scarcity could no longer dictate obedience. The guilds responded with increased scrutiny, sending emissaries and inspectors to record and report every human action. They attempted to brand the humans as instigators, warning that their interference could lead to instability. But the more they threatened, the more species rallied around the humans. Fear, once a reliable tool, now worked against the guilds. Communities trusted humans not because of law or punishment, but because of their consistent, uncompromising morality. One afternoon, the Mother approached Ethan with a proposal. "We have learned from you," she said. "We can help expand this network even faster. Our people understand local conditions, travel routes, and customs. With our guidance, more communities can be saved. The knowledge we share together will reach farther than any single human or guild ever could." Every community that learned to feed itself without waiting for guild permission became a small revolution in motion. The guilds tried a final, desperate measure. They sent armed vessels to enforce compliance, hoping to intimidate and seize equipment. But humans had anticipated this. Networks of mobile printers had been deployed, hidden and shielded. Communities were ready to relocate quickly, taking both technology and knowledge with them. Any attempt to seize control would only reveal the guilds' desperation and alienate species who had begun to see humans as protectors. When the guilds' ships arrived, they found the stations empty, printers relocated, and communities prepared. Attempts at confrontation failed, as local populations blocked access, using clever, nonviolent methods learned from humans. The guilds realized that intimidation could no longer enforce their rules. Humans had changed the nature of power. The Mother watched the events unfold from a hidden vantage point, her heart swelling with gratitude and awe. "They cannot win," she whispered to her children. "The humans have shown us a new way to survive. We no longer live under fear. We live because we act, because we help, and because we refuse to accept suffering as normal." Supplies, printers, and training were distributed in such a way that even if one network was disrupted, others would continue uninterrupted. The guilds' attempts to regain control were futile. The foundation of human influence had been built on empowerment, not control. As weeks passed, the Mother and her people expanded their network to nearby sectors. They carried food, knowledge, and the lessons learned from humans to others still suffering. Communities once reliant on guilds began to thrive independently. Children played in open spaces, laughter echoing where silence had once prevailed. Adults worked together, coordinating supplies and teaching neighbors to produce their own food. The Mother finally approached Ethan, gratitude overflowing. "You have changed everything," she said. "Not just for my people, but for everyone who has suffered under the guilds. You have taught us that life cannot be controlled through fear or scarcity. Your example will live beyond this station and this sector. You are not just saving lives, you are showing the galaxy a new way to exist. It is all of us working together, and it is you who will carry this forward. Every community that survives, every child fed, every species empowered, that is the real change. Humans may have started it, but you are spreading it. Humans continued to provide guidance, but their most important contribution was the principle they had demonstrated: action without expectation, morality without fear, and determination without compromise. The guilds, watching from afar, began to understand the reality. Their tools of control had failed. Scarcity could no longer dictate obedience. Fear could no longer enforce compliance. Humans had shown the galaxy a method of power that relied not on suppression, but on empowerment. The mother looked at her children, now healthy and energetic, and then back at Ethan. "They cannot stop what has begun. We will continue and more will join. Hunger has lost its power. The galaxy is changing because of humans like you. Then continue what we started. Feed the hungry, teach the helpless, empower the weak. That is how change spreads. The rest will follow." The stations became beacons of hope. Communities became centers of life and learning, and the guilds, for all their power and wealth, learned that one species acting with courage, compassion, and ingenuity could redefine the rules of the galaxy. The mother, once desperate and terrified, now stood tall. Her children played freely. Her people thrived. And humanity's quiet lesson continued to spread. Life matters, action matters, and those who refuse to look away from suffering are the most powerful force in existence. The stars outside the station shone brightly, indifferent yet witnessing a small corner of the galaxy transformed by simple acts of compassion, intelligence, and courage. Humans had not conquered with weapons, laws, or fear. They had conquered with morality, action, and the unyielding refusal to accept injustice. And in that moment, the mother understood a truth that would stay with her forever. Humans did not rule by dominance, they inspired by example. Their power was not in fear or greed, but in the ability to act rightly, even when it was difficult. And that was a power the guilds could never control. The station had changed completely. What had once been a place of noise, indifference, and careful calculation had become a center of life, learning, and hope. Children ran through the corridors, laughing and playing, their bellies full and spirits lifted. Adults coordinated supplies, shared knowledge, and trained others to produce their own food. Communities that had once depended entirely on guild shipments now operated independently, guided by the principles humans had demonstrated: action, compassion, and ingenuity. Ethan Hale stood quietly in a corner, observing the activity. He was tired physically, emotionally, and mentally, but he did not feel weary in the way he had once known. There was purpose here, a living, breathing result of effort, determination, and care. The human had started something small, feeding a single family in a crowded station. But now, weeks later, the impact was vast. Entire species had been empowered to survive without reliance on corrupt guilds. Hunger no longer controlled them. The mother approached him, her posture confident and proud. Her children followed closely, playing nearby with others who had once been starving. She had changed too, growing from a desperate, pleading figure into a respected leader among her people. Her voice carried calm authority tinged with awe. "We have come far," she said softly. "Your example has not only saved my children, but it has saved many others across sectors. The galaxy will remember this." That is what matters. Humans had introduced a new principle to the galaxy. Life was more important than profit, compassion stronger than fear, and determination stronger than control. Everywhere around the station, other species were realizing this truth. Small groups traveled between communities, sharing knowledge, equipment, and skills. The simple act of feeding the hungry had blossomed into a vast network of self-sustaining communities. Meanwhile, the guilds continued to struggle. Their attempts to assert control had failed spectacularly. Inspectors, emissaries, and armed fleets had been repelled not by weapons, but by knowledge, preparation, and moral authority. The guilds had always relied on fear, scarcity, and manipulation. Humans had shown that those tools could be rendered useless when the oppressed were empowered to act independently. Every guild plan was countered by human ingenuity, by preparedness, and by the willingness to help rather than control. Ethan watched reports of guild activity from the secure consoles in the station. The guilds were desperate, attempting to regain influence through legislation, propaganda, and minor blockades. But it was too late. Species had already learned how to survive and thrive without relying on guild permission. Communities protected each other, moving printers and supplies as needed, sharing knowledge openly, and teaching newcomers to do the same. Scarcity was no longer a weapon. Hunger was no longer a tool of fear. The mother guided her people through one of the larger distribution points, where humans had set up several printers to feed entire communities at once. She smiled as she watched her children interact with others, laughing and learning. She realized the enormity of what had happened. The small act of kindness from one human had created a ripple that now spanned multiple sectors, empowering countless lives. "Your species does not conquer with weapons," she said to Ethan quietly. "You conquer by showing a new way to exist. It is terrifying in a way because it cannot be stopped by force. You change minds, inspire hope, and teach independence. That is a power the guilds cannot understand. The effect multiplies, and no force can undo it." Word of humans' actions spread quickly, and guilds realized that open confrontation would only amplify the problem. The moral and practical influence of humans was already reshaping the balance of power across entire regions. One morning, the mother called Ethan aside. "I want to thank you again, but I also want to show you something. Look at what your actions have started." She gestured to a large projection screen which displayed multiple locations across sectors. Pins lit up wherever human-trained networks were operating. Communities that had once been starving were now thriving, and the pins were spreading faster than anyone could track in real time. Ethan studied the screen. It was overwhelming. Thousands of lives had been stabilized. Entire sectors had begun to organize independently of guild control. The impact of a single human's act, feeding one family in a crowded station, had multiplied far beyond what anyone could have anticipated. "This is incredible," he said quietly. "It proves something I have always believed: one act can inspire many others. When you help without expectation, without fear, the effect is unstoppable. That is the goal. We do not need to conquer, we need to empower. When communities are strong, they protect themselves. When hope exists, oppression loses its power. That is how humans operate. That is how we change things. The power you have shown us cannot be undone. The galaxy is changing because of humans like you. One human's act started it. Now the galaxy is learning that survival and compassion cannot be controlled by fear. Hunger no longer dictated action. Fear no longer commanded obedience. Humanity's example had created a lasting system that could withstand interference, intimidation, or scarcity. The guilds, watching from afar, understood the truth too late. Their tools of control, their fleets, inspectors, and regulations, had failed. Human influence had taught the galaxy a new way, one where life and knowledge could not be dictated by fear. The most powerful species were no longer those who commanded weapons or wealth, but those who acted morally, strategically, and relentlessly for the good of others. The mother approached Ethan one final time, her children playing nearby. "You have shown us the truth," she said softly. "We no longer kneel in fear or desperation. We stand strong, capable, and free. You did this not by force, not by law, but by showing us a new path. We will never forget it. Humans only showed the way. You carry it forward." Ethan watched the stars from the station's observation deck. Ships moved silently across the dark expanse of space, unaware of the small yet profound transformation taking place below. Yet the change was real, unstoppable, and lasting. Humans had not conquered with weapons, wealth, or fear. They had conquered with morality, ingenuity, and the refusal to let suffering continue. That was a power no one could take away. The mother stood beside him, watching her children play freely. "They cannot stop what has begun," she said. "This is only the start. The galaxy will remember humans not for what they take, but for what they give, and we will carry this forward." And now the galaxy has learned that life, compassion, and action are stronger than any law, weapon, or threat. The rest will follow. Humans had shown that power could exist without dominance, that influence could thrive without fear, and that morality could change the course of entire civilizations. Communities continued to feed themselves, teach others, and grow, spreading hope farther than any fleet or fleet of guild enforcers could reach. The mother, once desperate and pleading, now led her people with strength and wisdom. Her children thrived, surrounded by laughter and life. And humanity, quiet and steadfast, had left an indelible mark on the galaxy, a reminder that those who act rightly, even when it is difficult, are the most powerful force of all. In the end, hunger was defeated not by weapons, not by laws, and not by fear. It was defeated by action, by compassion, and by the human refusal to look away. The galaxy had been changed forever, and all because one human had chosen to feed the hungry, simply because it was the right thing to do. The mother smiled at Ethan one last time. "You have given us life, hope, and freedom. The galaxy will never forget humans. We will carry your lessons, and your actions will echo forever. The future belongs to those who refuse to look away.